Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty out there, actually. We've got a source stack that really pushes into, well, deep speculation, but with a surprising amount of structural thinking behind it. We're asking one of those big what-if questions,
Yes.
specifically about Genesis.
That's right. A really provocative one.
What if people lived on Earth before the first Adam?
Yeah, it's quite the hypothetical. And it's fascinating how our sources approach this. They aren't saying, this definitely happened.
No, not at all.
It's more like a thought experiment.
Yeah.
They're using this premise, okay, let's assume these people existed, to explore some really fundamental ideas.
Like what?
Things like divine authority, what the curse actually entails, and what Adam's job, his mandate, really was.
Okay, so that distinction is key. We're not here to prove pre-Adamic people existed.
Nope.
We're following the logic. If you accept the premise, where does it lead? What are the consequences?
Exactly. And our mission today is to look at the two main arguments the sources present about who would have been in charge, who held the governing authority over these, well, hypothetical beings.
And then how Adam messing up basically sealed the deal for everyone, regardless.
Precisely. We need to unpack hypothesis one, the idea that Satan was ruling,
Okay.
and contrast that with hypothesis two, that God was still directly in charge.
Right, two completely different visions of what that pre-Adamic world might have looked like.
Yeah, one is, pretty grim, immediate oppression. The other suggests a kind of non-oppressive state based on God's commands.
And this whole thing forces us to think about rulership, legality. Who actually has the right to govern the earth?
That's the core issue.
Okay, so where does this whole line of questioning even start? It's not just pulled out of thin air, right?
Yeah.
The source material grounds it somewhere specific in Genesis.
It does. It all hinges on Genesis chapter 4, right after Cain kills Abel. God confronts Cain, curses him, sends him away, and Cain says something really striking in verse 14. He's afraid. He says, "Whoever finds me will kill me."
Yeah, that line always felt a bit strange. If it's just Adam, Eve, and Cain left, who is this whoever?
Exactly. Who's out there? And why would they automatically want to kill him?
Good question.
So our sources lay out the two main explanations people usually give. The first one is pretty straightforward, doesn't require any pre-Adamic people.
This is the idea that Adam and Eve probably had other kids by then.
Right. Genesis 5 tells us Adam was 130 when Seth was born.
Okay.
And then he lived another 800 years after that. Plenty of time for, lots of other children, maybe even grandchildren.
So Cain could just be afraid of his own brothers, sisters, nephews, whatever, coming after him for revenge.
Yeah, kind of early family blood feud situation. Maybe he married a sister, we don't know. But if that's the case, the whole other people question just dissolves. It's self-contained within Adam's family.
But that's not the path our sources are taking us down today.
No. They focus on the second possibility. What if Cain was afraid of people who were not related to Adam and Eve?
Pre-existing people.
Exactly. Beings already on Earth before Adam was even created. And maybe, just maybe, when Cain left, he found his wife among their daughters.
Okay, if we go down that road, if we assume there was this other population out there.
Then bam, huge structural questions pop up immediately. Who's in charge of them? What's their world like? Is it cursed? Is it not?
Right, which forces us to think about governance.
Yeah.
Let's dive into hypothesis one then. This one suggests a pretty dark scenario for the world outside Eden before Adam's fall.
It really does. Hypothesis 1 basically says, because God hadn't appointed a legitimate ruler for Earth, yet Adam wasn't on the scene in that capacity, the default ruler was Satan.
And his style of rule.
Pure survival of the fittest, as the source puts it. It's not just animals competing, it's a whole system of oppression, tyranny, maybe even violence.
Where does the source get this idea of Satan's ruling style?
It points to how Satan supposedly rules in Hades, the realm of the condemned. The argument is, if that's his method there, oppressive, competitive, merciless, then that's likely how he would operate on Earth too, in any place where God hadn't specifically installed a counter-authority.
So Adam was meant to be that counter-authority. Without him, there's a power vacuum, and Satan fills it.
Fills it with his own oppressive system, yes. But the source is very clear. Even if Satan was ruling by default, his rule was unlawful dominion.
Unlawful. Explain that. How can you rule if it's unlawful?
It's unlawful according to God's standard. God rules through love, expressed as commandments. Satan's rule based on survival of the fittest, selfishness, destruction, that's the opposite. It's fundamentally illegal in God's eyes.
So God might allow it temporarily.
Yes, the idea is God might postpone judgment, allowing creatures free will to play out to make their choices, but that doesn't make Satan's rule legitimate. It's still a crime, an act of rebellion against divine order.
Okay, that framework helps. Now let's apply this unlawful rule to these hypothetical pre-Adamic people. What were they like under Satan's thumb, according to this hypothesis?
The picture is bleak. The sources suggest they were fundamentally unable to resist sin. They just didn't have the spiritual equipment.
Like spiritually weak.
More than weak. The source describes them as creatures just like beasts, only with higher intelligence. They might have been smart, but they had no defense against evil.
How does the source justify saying they couldn't resist? That seems like a strong claim.
The core argument is that they likely lacked a conscience.
A conscience.
Yeah. And the source connects this to Romans 2.14 about the law being written on the hearts of people. Conscience isn't just feeling bad. It's having God's moral law inside you.
Giving you the ability to know right from wrong and the strength to choose right.
Exactly. That inner law gives you the power to reject sin. If these pre-Adamic beings didn't have that, they were essentially defenseless. Their intelligence wouldn't help them against Satan's influence.
Which makes them fundamentally different from Adam.
Absolutely different. Adam was created with the word, with the capacity to hear, understand, and obey the commandment. He had the potential to win.
And the logic follows. If any of those pre-Adamic beings had been given that capacity, that word,
then that being would have effectively been the first Adam, by definition. Since the Bible says Adam was the first, these hypothetical predecessors must have lacked that crucial spiritual component.
Okay, let's shift to the physical side. If hypothesis 1 is true, and Satan's rule is the law of the jungle, what did the world look like? The physical environment.
It implies physical corruption was already happening, even before Adam sinned and brought the official curse.
How so?
The survival of the fittest mentality would mean fleshly desires, uncontrolled impulses, aggression, maybe even disease were already active in their bodies.
Yeah.
The source uses the imagery of thorns and thistles potentially rising not just from the ground, but metaphorically from their very flesh.
Wow. Okay.
And this leads to the big physical indicator for hypothesis 1.
Carnivores.
Carnivores, yes. If it's truly survival of the fittest, the peaceable kingdom idea goes out the window. You'd have animals hunting and killing each other. The existence of carnivorous animals outside Eden before Adam's fall would be strong evidence for this hypothesis.
Okay, that sets up a major point of contention later, I bet.
Definitely. It's crucial for deciding between the hypotheses.
So, hypothesis 1. Earth outside Eden is already under Satan's unlawful, oppressive rule, populated by intelligent but spiritually defenseless beings, and physically marked by corruption, fleshly desires, and likely carnivorous animals. A grim picture.
Very grim.
Now let's pivot completely. Hypothesis 2 offers a radically different view. Rule by God.
Yes. Hypothesis 2 says, even if these pre-Adamic people existed outside the garden, the ultimate governing authority over the entire earth was still God's. And God rules through love and commandment.
Okay, so what does that world look like? Outside Eden, but still under God's direct rule via commandment.
It means non-oppression. The law of the jungle couldn't legally take hold, because God's commandment would be the prevailing law. So no thorns and thistles from the flesh, no systemic oppression. The animals would likely still be living peacefully. The sources suggest God would have actively shielded the bodies and minds of these people and the animals from Satan's direct oppressive force, what the source calls Satan Garat.
But wait a second. Satan exists, right? He's called the prince of this world eventually. How can God be ruling outside Eden if Satan is already actively trying to mess things up? Doesn't Satan's influence imply God's rule isn't total?
This goes back to the legality and Adam's specific role. The key point in the source material is that Adam was the first creature God granted legitimate governmental authority over the physical earth. He got the official title deed, so to speak.
So Satan, even though he's powerful and evil,
he didn't have the legal right to rule the earth yet. He might have had influence, he might have been causing trouble, tempting fallen angels, or whatever else was going on in the spiritual realm.
but he couldn't claim legitimate ownership.
Exactly. He could only oppress illegally. He couldn't truly govern until he tricks the legitimate ruler Adam into forfeiting his authority.
So, under hypothesis 2, any pre-Adamic people, even if maybe simple or vulnerable, were still technically under God's legal protection through the commandment. The physical curse couldn't touch them yet.
That's the implication of hypothesis 2. The protection was legal and structural. But this raises another question.
Which is?
If God was already ruling everything perfectly fine through the commandment, why create Adam at all? Why introduce the risk? Why the test?
Good point.
The test, according to the source, was necessary, not just for Adam, but for all of creation. It was needed to publicly demonstrate and prove the truth and justice of God's love as expressed in his commandments. It was a cosmic validation.
A verification process.
Exactly. And the source is really clear. God didn't order Satan to tempt Adam. That wasn't part of the plan.
Satan acted on his own.
Yes, out of his own malice and free will. His goal was to destroy Adam and undermine God's commandment. Tempting Adam was Satan's crime, his attempt to usurp power. The test itself was necessary for God's purposes, but Satan's method of temptation was his own evil act.
Okay, that distinction is important. So we have two clear competing models. Hypothesis 1, Satan rules unlawfully, world is physically corrupt. Hypothesis 2, God rules legally via commandment, world is physically protected.
And the decision between them seems to hang on one critical factor.
The curse.
The curse. That's what Section 4 really digs into. Was the land outside Eden already cursed before Adam sinned, or did the curse only come after his fall?
Let's define the curse as the source material sees it. What are its signs?
Primarily the physical manifestations, the ground bringing forth thorns and thistles, as Genesis 3 says, and the breakdown of natural harmony. The source points to Isaiah 65, which talks about the wolf and lamb feeding together in the future kingdom, implying that now, because of the curse, wolves eat lambs. So carnivores become a sign of the cursed state.
Okay, so if there were already thorns, thistles, and carnivores outside Eden before Adam sinned, hypothesis 1 looks pretty strong.
It would lend it significant weight, yes. But then comes the counter-argument from the source, focusing on legality again.
Which is?
Who actually has the authority to impose a curse like that? The source points to Genesis 5.29, where it says God cursed the ground. The argument is only God can legally enact that kind of judgment on the earth.
So Satan can tempt, deceive, oppress?
Influence like crazy, yes. He can exploit the failures of creatures, but he can't unilaterally change the fundamental legal status of the planet or impose the physical curse himself.
God has to be the one to do that.
That's the argument. Therefore, the source concludes the physical signs of the cursed thorns, thistles, widespread carnivorous behavior could not have existed before God pronounced judgment on Adam and the ground after the fall.
Even if Satan was already making life miserable for any pre-Adamic beings.
Even then, the land itself remained legally uncursed, protected by the commandment structure, until Adam's failure triggered God's judgment. This leans the argument heavily towards hypothesis 2, at least regarding the physical state of the land.
Okay, that seems like a strong legal case for hypothesis 2 regarding the land. But then the source throws a curveball, right? It introduces something that kind of bypasses the whole physical curse debate.
It does. It's a really profound point. The expert in our source material stresses sin can happen even without a cursed body or a cursed environment.
You don't need physical corruption to choose wrongly.
Exactly. Your physical state doesn't determine your capacity for willful disobedience.
And this is where the comparison to the 1,000-year kingdom comes in.
Yes, the millennial kingdom. It's the perfect test case in the source's view. Think about it. During that 1,000 years, the curse is lifted. Revelation 22 says, no longer will there be any curse.
Okay, so the environment is perfect again.
Pristine. Isaiah 65 suggests no more thorns or thistles, animals at peace. The people living then will have bodies free from the ingrained corruption, the fleshly desires that plague us now because of inherited sin. They'll be living in a physical paradise.
Physically, sort of like Adam before the fall, maybe, though maybe not spiritually identical.
Physically uncorrupted, yes.
Ugh.
But what happens? At the end of the 1,000 years, Satan is let loose for a short time. Revelation 20 says he deceives the nations Gog and Magog, a vast number of people, and they gather to attack God's people and the holy city.
Wait, people with perfect bodies in a perfect world still choose to follow Satan.
That's the shocking point. It proves that free will is the ultimate factor, not the physical body or environment.
Wow.
The original sin we inherit makes sin almost automatic for us now, tied to our fallen nature. But the millennial kingdom example shows that even without that inherited corruption, without the curse active, creatures can still choose rebellion purely out of a failure of their will.
So the state of the land, cursed or uncursed, doesn't actually prevent sin.
It doesn't, which means, going back to the pre-Adamic question,
It doesn't ultimately matter if the land outside Eden was physically cursed or not.
right. Either way, Satan could still have been influencing and deceiving any pre-Adamic people. He could have been exploiting their lack of conscience, turning them into servants of sin through their own choices, even if the physical thorns and carnivores hadn't appeared yet because God hadn't legally imposed the curse.
That kind of resolves the tension between hypothesis 1 and 2, doesn't it? Satan was likely governing them through sin and deception, like hypothesis 1 suggests in practice, even if the legal state of the land was still uncursed, as hypothesis 2 suggests.
It seems to synthesize them, yes. The method of rule might have been satanic oppression via sin, even if the legal status of the land awaited Adam's failure.
Okay, if we accept that, it leads us to Adam's role. If the outside world was already spiritually messy, what was Adam actually supposed to do? What did his authority mean? Was he instantly king of everything, or was it something he had to, fight for?
That's the next big question the source tackles, the scope of Adam's authority. It looks at that moment in Luke 4, where Satan tempts Jesus by offering him all the authority over the kingdoms of the world, authority Satan claimed he received, presumably implying he took it from Adam.
Okay.
So, did that authority mean Adam just automatically ruled everything effortlessly from day one? Or was it more like a right, a permission that he then had to exercise?
If it's the latter, that changes everything. Adam isn't just tending a garden.
He's potentially a king preparing for conquest.
Wow.
And this is where the source brings in the Canaan analogy.
Comparing Adam to the Israelites entering the Promised Land.
Exactly. God gave the Israelites the right to the land of Canaan. It was promised to them.
But it wasn't empty.
Not at all. It was filled with other peoples, engaged in practices God condemned. The Israelites didn't just stroll in and take over.
They had to fight.
Yeah.
God commanded them to drive out the inhabitants. Deuteronomy 11.23 talks about that.
Right. Their God-given authority was a legal right combined with a command to act, to take possession, often through conflict.
So applying that to Adam.
The analogy suggests God gave Adam legitimate authority over the whole earth. Eden was his starting point, his capital maybe. But the territory outside Eden was already, in a sense, occupied territory suffering under Satan's illegal oppression.
So the test in the garden, the tree.
That wasn't the end goal, it was the qualification test. If Adam passed, if he obeyed God, he would have solidified his position as God's righteous representative.
And then?
Then he would have had the confirmed moral and legal authority to go out and exercise his dominion, to confront Satan's influence, liberate any oppressed beings, and bring the entire earth under the rule of God's commandment, just like the Israelites were supposed to take Canaan.
So Eden was the beachhead.
Possibly.
Yeah.
The secure base from which the reclamation project was to be launched.
But he failed the test.
He failed, and in that moment, he didn't just lose his own standing, he surrendered the entire delegated authority.
And Satan.
Satan, having successfully corrupted the legitimate ruler, effectively snatched the title deed. Instantly, the whole world, Eden, the outside, any hypothetical pre-Adamic people, all fell under the now unified dominion of sin and the curse that followed.
So his one act of disobedience had truly universal consequence.
Completely universal. If he had won, he could have potentially liberated the world outside Eden. Those people and creatures oppressed by Satan could have been brought under God's loving rule.
Not because he lost.
The entire creation fell into the state we now know. His failure unified the fate of everything.
Which brings us to the end game for those hypothetical pre-Adamic people. Regardless of who was ruling them before Adam's test God legally, or Satan illegally, Adam's failure determined their ultimate fate.
That's what the source material argues, unequivocally. If they existed, the source just calls them physical bodies that might have been there. Their destiny was tied completely to Adam. He was the representative head.
His failure affected all flesh. The source mentions Psalm 14, there was none that does good. That suddenly included everyone, everywhere.
Yes. Adam's sin introduced original sin and death as a universal reality for all creation linked to him. Had he succeeded, his authority would have expanded outwards, bringing protection and the rule of love to all the kingdoms of the world.
But his defeat meant the opposite. Everything fell under Satan's, now legitimized in a stolen sense, a rule of sin leading to death.
Which is why the second Adam, Christ, had to come to redeem not just humans descended from Adam, but the entire creation order that fell with him.
Let's speculate for a moment based on the source. If Adam had won and started extending God's rule, what about those hypothetical pre-Adamic people who might have already chosen Satan's side even before the official curse?
Good question. The source suggests that if Adam had succeeded, the rule of love would have prevailed. Many, perhaps most, would have been brought under that rule, but those who insisted on clinging to sin, who actively rejected the commandment even when offered liberation, they would likely have faced judgment, destruction. The completion of free will requires that ultimate rebellion is dealt with.
But the source adds another layer, doesn't it? About even the descendants of those who were saved still needing future tests.
Yes, it draws that parallel again with the millennial kingdom and the Gog and Magog rebellion. Even if a generation is saved and lives in a perfect world under righteous rule, free will means the potential for future generations to choose wrongly always exists.
So verification continues.
It seems so. The source uses Revelation 20.7, the final rebellion after the 1,000 years, as proof that free will needs to be fully tested and finalized across history, even after periods of peace. Judgment is always the final step.
Okay, this all seems to be building towards a final point in the source material. Why ultimately does the initial question, who ruled the pre-Adamic people, become less important?
Because, the source argues, Adam's creation wasn't just about starting human history on Earth. It served a much larger cosmic purpose.
Which was?
To facilitate the completion of the test of free will among all creatures, and ultimately to provide the context for God to destroy sin and death itself. 1 Corinthians 15.25 is referenced. He must reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. Adam was a necessary part of that grand unfolding plan.
So the governance of some hypothetical beings before him is kind of a side detail compared to the main plot.
That's the perspective. The sources emphasize that God planned for the cross from the very beginning. Romans 5.8, Colossians 1.20 point to this eternal plan. Adam's role, his test, was structurally necessary to set up the need for the cross.
How so?
His failure demonstrated humanity's inability to perfectly keep the commandment under the pressure of temptation, highlighting the depth of sin. This, in turn, set the stage for the second Adam, Christ, to come.
To succeed where Adam failed.
Exactly. To take on fallen flesh, live under the curse, and still obey the commandment perfectly, thereby proving the absolute truth and love of God through his sacrifice.
So if Adam had somehow succeeded on his own,
the source implies the plan might have unfolded differently. Maybe the specific mechanism of the cross wouldn't have been necessary in the same way. But his failure was foreseen. And it was the necessary prelude to the ultimate demonstration of God's righteousness and love through Christ.
Okay, let's bring it all home. The source looks at the premise, pre-Adamic people, unverified, considers the two governance options, Satan versus God, sees that Adam's failure unified the outcome anyway. Everything fell under sin, and therefore concludes.
Therefore, the question of who ruled those hypothetical people before Adam's fall is, in the grand scheme of things, a secondary question. Maybe even, as the source bluntly puts it, a question without much ultimate significance.
Because the central overriding reality is the fall of Adam and the universal need for redemption through Christ.
Precisely. The plan of salvation through the cross is the main event. It addresses the universal problem created by Adam's failure, and that reality kind of overshadows the specific governmental setup that might have existed hypothetically before the fall.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. We went from Cain's fear through these complex governance models, wrestled with the timing of the curse.
Realize sin is possible even without the curse, thanks to the millennial kingdom example.
Reframed Adam's job, using the Canaan analogy not just a gardener, but a potential conqueror for God.
And landed on the conclusion that Adam's failure unified everything, making the prior state less critical than the solution God provided.
Right. The key takeaway isn't really about pre-Adamic people, is it? It's about the weight of Adam's responsibility, the nature of sin, the scope of authority, and how everything points to Christ.
Exactly. It shows how even these really speculative theological paths, when followed rigorously through the lens of scripture and structure, ultimately lead back to the core message of the gospel, the necessity of the second Adam.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive, moving back from speculating about pre-Adamics, I want to leave you, our listeners, with something to chew on, building directly from this idea of primary versus secondary truths.
We just heard how the source concluded the pre-Adamic governance question was secondary, maybe even meaningless in the ultimate sense, because Adam's failure unified the outcome under sin, making the cross the central, necessary event. So, here's the final thought. If that premise holds, what other theological questions or debates do we get really invested in today? Things maybe about the precise mechanics of free will versus sovereignty, or the exact timeline of every single end times event? Could some of those also be structurally secondary? Could it be that compared to the absolute, definitive truth of the cross and God's plan to complete free will and judge sin through Christ, Some of our most heated debates might actually be less critical than we think. Think about the theological points you argue about most passionately, then ask, if the other side turned out to be right on this specific detail, would it actually change the fundamental reality of the fall, the necessity of the cross, or the ultimate victory of Christ? Just something to consider.